Join me, Tom, on the side of abolishing the Electoral College and the Supreme Court. And the Supreme... Hold on. What is the argument for abolishing the Supreme Court? What? Supreme Jury? So you want... Are you saying that you want a Supreme Jury there as part of the Supreme Court? If you want to hop on, I would love to hear this argument for abolishing the Supreme Court. I've never heard this one before.
How's it going, Mr. Foolery?
It's going well. Okay, so you're saying you want to abolish the Supreme Court and have I don't think that they're actually like deciding whether or not somebody's innocent or guilty. They're deciding whether or not the charges abide by the law or whether or not they're allowed to charge something.
Exactly, Tom. Exactly.
Why would a jury ever decide that?
You're getting it.
They don't have a law degree. Like,
why not? Why do they need one?
Well, for the same reason that we have lawyers?
No.
And judges?
Why do we have juries for, criminal? You don't have a law degree to be on a criminal jury. You're deciding whether the law has been correctly applied in that case.
Yeah, but they're deciding whether or not you broke the law, not whether or not the charges abide by the law.
Whether or not you broke the Constitution. Whether or not you broke the rule established by the congressional authority, right? Just change what they're deciding.
Well, hold on. Those are different parts of the process. Like, you don't need to change what they're deciding. They're just doing something totally different. We would still need somebody to actually decide on whether or not the charges and what it is that you're doing within the law actually abide by the Constitution and the law.
Yeah, let the jury decide that.
Wait, but you just said that just have it change what it is that they're deciding. But I'm saying that if you changed what they decide, you'd still need somebody to decide the legal.
All right, so imagine this, right? We've got, I'm not saying get rid of all judges or like all, agencies that implement rules or rulings or anything like that.
But you're talking about within the appellate court, you're saying that they should have juries.
No, I'm saying,
on the appeals.
You go to the Supreme jury. Okay, let's just say, Oberfeller v. Hodges or whatever, right? They make it all the way up to the Supreme jury, okay? And now, instead of these 9 unelected, philosopher kings deciding whether or not gay marriage is constitutional or bans on gay marriage are constitutional, you just got, 100 random Americans. They're making that decision.
Yeah, I just don't have... I have less faith that, like, when there was a portion of the country that actually thought that Donald Trump lost the election or that he was cheated in some way, that, like, they would have come to the same decisions as even all of these Donald Trump appointed people who all decided that, no, the election was, like, safe and fair, and that, like, he doesn't get to overturn this election just because of these little things that you think are weird or whatever. Like, they ruled against 30 something different cases trying to overturn the election, and I don't know that these like random 100 people would have come to the same decisions.
Well, look, when obviously a Supreme jury might come to some different decisions than a Supreme Court. However, keep in mind that obviously lawyers are present and making arguments. There would be a judge in the chamber kind of instructing the jury, this is what this means, this is the power you have, similar guidance that a judge would give to a jury in a criminal case, right, or in a civil case. And that process seems to be extremely sound, not without its problems. Obviously, sometimes juries come to what we would find to be incorrect decisions on the criminal side, right? But this isn't like a totally, unabridged sort of random group of people. It's a random group of people, but they're guided through the legal process, and it's up to the sort of adjudicators of the case to both guide the jury but also make arguments to the jury. I think that fundamentally it's a question of like, who would you rather have to convince that something is or is not the case, or is not, or should or should not be applied? Should you have to convince a group of highly undemocratically appointed philosopher kings who have wildly disparate, oftentimes views that, and some of these views are just completely abhorrent, right? Would you rather have to, convince those people, or would you rather have to convince a group of just 100 random Americans, right? Now, a lot of random Americans, have crazy views. Like, that's totally true, right? But so do Supreme Court justices, and so
Sure,
what's
but
like more likely?
I
Yeah.
can't think of like so one
There's also a
judges
sense of justice that I think the jury has that a
sure, but
court doesn't.
the judges are going to be doing this anyways. Like again, we're talking about whether or not oh my goodness, this fucking game keeps putting ads right in the middle of the fucking game. This is the fourth one in a row. What is happening? Um
Got an ad blocker, Tom. Come on.
The judges are still deciding whether or not something abides by the law anyways, right? So if we look at like the Kyle Rittenhouse
Right.
case, when they start trying to charge him with having a gun while underage, or like crossing state lines or things like that, that were illegal and unconstitutional, like charges that they weren't allowed to charge him with. The judge is the one who decided that they're not allowed to charge him with these things. That is the same thing that the Supreme Court is doing, is they're deciding not whether or not the person is guilty, but whether or not charges abide by the law. So when Donald Trump goes and appeals his New York case and says, well, they're charging me just for having like a little bit of a difference in some of my audits on my properties and crap like that. This doesn't make sense when there wasn't even a victim in this case, and the banks say that it's okay and that they're not upset with this and blah blah blah. Like the Supreme Court isn't there deciding whether or not he's guilty on this. They're deciding whether or not these charges are actually legal, right? This is we're saying that I'm saying that judges, one way or the other, are still going to be making these decisions even in the court cases. It's only when it's going to be like appealed to higher courts that they're going to end up going through like an appeals process in an appellate court, and then maybe to the Supreme Court, to where they're also making the same decisions that judges are making anyways. Do you think that, like in the case with Kyle Rittenhouse, it should have been the jury deciding whether or not he was allowed to get charged with the gun charges, the possession charges?
Well, I don't really know exactly how grand juries work, but isn't that essentially the function of a grand jury, where you impanel a jury which essentially decides whether or not to bring forth charges?
The grand jury is like I believe it is a group of people who actually do have like specialized qualifications, but they're more so, yes, they're going over whether or not you have like enough evidence to actually bring charges. Yeah.
So a grand jury is not a group. I didn't know this. So a grand jury is not a group of just random people. This is a group of, I guess, legal professionals or something, or
I believe so. Okay, Google. What is a grand jury?
what is a grand
According
jury?
to Wikipedia, a grand jury is a jury empowered by law to conduct legal proceedings, investigate potential criminal conduct, and determine whether criminal charges should be brought. A grand jury may subpoena physical evidence or a person to testify. A grand jury is separate from the courts, which do not preside over its functioning.
Yeah, so yeah,
I mean, it
they're
says
like
randomly selected citizens here, so I mean, I don't know. It doesn't.
yeah, maybe. But
I don't
yeah,
really.
it is. This part of what I'm saying though is that like yes, these are like different parts of the process where we're talking about like whether or not the
and all I'm
charges
saying
abide
is
by the
what
law versus
yeah.
whether or not you have enough evidence versus like. And so I'm saying that even if you go and get a grand jury or a supreme jury instead of supreme judges, that you're still going to have judges making these decisions in the actual court cases. They're still deciding like whether or not this is the case.
I'm not
It's only
I'm not
when it
saying
gets appealed up to them that this goes up. And now you're saying, well, in every other court case, of course, yes, they're always going to have judges making these decisions. But then when it goes to an appeal, now you'll have a jury making the decision in the supreme jury part, where it just it seems to break like the process that's going to be followed in every other instance.
Well, I mean, you could sort of distribute this system to federal and appellate courts as well, right? That jury would just be made up of people from the different regions of the different district courts, right? And then obviously if you have like a group of random people from like the Southwestern District or whatever, say something that's genuinely, totally wild or whatever, then lawyers could, decide, okay, well, hey, a jury comes together, Supreme Grand Jury, and they come together and say, is this a case that we want to bring to an actually sort of at-large Supreme Jury? And then they make the decision as to whether or not, that district court or that district jury, I should say, made a legal decision, or if they were operating within the sort of constraints that we think would be reasonable under the Constitution. That's really it. I mean, I don't think that this is as procedurally complicated. I think that really it's more, about the merits of such a system and like what we would maybe expect such a system to, what the outcomes of such a system would be. I think that's up for debate because I don't know of any country that has such a system, but I feel like it would result in pretty good outcomes. I think there's reason to think that. I mean,
I think that like generally they're more like referees instead. I agree with like a jury deciding whether or not you're innocent or guilty. But then when it comes to like the legality of something, yeah, I do think that like it ought to be, because in a court case, the court is already telling you this is the law. This is what the law says. And now you're deciding, is this the case, right? You're deciding, is this what happened? Do you have enough evidence to believe this is what happened? Like that's what the jury does, right? But the judges
not
are there as
a grand jury
referees.
does.
Sure, not a grand jury, but I'm talking about yes.
But grand juries seem to work pretty well, right? Like grand juries are responsible for basically determining.
No. That is the same thing that grand juries are doing. Grand juries are deciding whether or not you have probable cause in order to file the charges. They're deciding, do you have enough evidence to actually charge them with this charge? They're still doing the same thing where they're deciding whether or not there is enough evidence.
Well, I get what you're saying, right? They're not deciding the interpretation of law itself, but that's just because arbitrarily we've decided, well, I don't want to say arbitrarily, but we've decided that for one reason or another, we don't want juries to be sort of interpreting the law or, making decisions like that. But what I'm saying is, let's just let them do that too. I think that, one of the problems that I have with our system fundamentally is that I think, I'm willing to concede that, sometimes a grand jury or, a supreme grand jury or a supreme jury would make decisions that a lot of people probably wouldn't like, right, for one reason or another. But I think that there's something about the way that we structure our current Supreme Court, which is highly elitist, it's highly undemocratic. And some people might say that that's a good thing, that, courts shouldn't have democratic influence. But I just totally disagree. Look, we live in a democracy, right? Our government and our sort of laws should be such that we can say with some reason that people are abiding by them. If the Supreme Court did something that 99% of people disagreed with deeply, but they said, our niche understanding of the Constitution says this is how it needs to be, despite the fact that 99% of people disagree with it, then that's just bad, right? Like, that's not good, And I think that if we had a jury, at least you could look at rulings from the Supreme Jury and say, well, hey, look, a jury of our peers, members of our community, were argued to, and they came to the decision that this is kind of the most reasonable, everyday interpretation of this law, this section of the Constitution, this precedent, this power of the government. I think that that's a good check, not only on the power of the government, right? They have to be directly accountable to a jury of our peers when it comes to legal rulings, but then every sort of subsequent, like you said, distributed court decision where federal courts now have to reference basically the power and the decisions of the jury, and not this unelected group of 9, lawyers appointed through highly undemocratic means, right? I think that that's a better system for our sense of justice and fairness within the judicial system.
Yeah, like, if anything, I would want to, because you keep mentioning, like, unelected. Like, if anything, I think that, like, it might make sense to just change the process as to how these people get put into place. Instead of having just like the president be the one person who can nominate these people, you have like senators or something. But even then, like I would love to like find like a way to where we could actually take politics out of it, because it right now we want We
A
want our
jury,
Supreme
no
Court to be
politics.
taken out of, like, we want them to be as separated from politics as possible, but that's obviously not the case when, like, Donald Trump gets to pick his, and then Biden gets to pick his, and then Obama gets to pick his, and Bush gets to pick his, and, like, it just,
Right.
yeah, it makes it to where
Yeah, and you don't want
politics
them
are
directly
obviously
elected for the
involved.
same reason, right? You don't want to directly elect judges because then they are just politicians at that point. But then the jury is like the perfect way to solve those problems because this is a group of unelected people, so they're not sort of electorally accountable. They don't have to worry about the whims of. I mean, I guess they suffer some reputational risk as anybody does in a jury, but I don't know if that's necessarily the worst thing in the
Well,
world.
they
But
are able to get
um,
impeached by the Senate. Like it's like Alito's run into some issues recently where he is supposed to be separated from any sort of political
right,
rhetoric or language or anything, and he's had a bunch of problems with like supposedly having like Trump yard signs in his
yeah,
in some of his yards, or that he like
yeah,
yelled
and
during
members of
Biden's
juries can
speech that
get
he was a liar. Like,
removed for the same thing.
right, and so
Like if
I'm
a
saying
member
that
of the
like
Supreme Jury was like tweeting about how much he loves Donald Trump in the midst of serving on a jury to decide whether or not Trump stole the election, that person would be removed
right, I'm
summarily,
just saying that
right? It wouldn't be
when
a
you're saying that like they don't have like an electoral process that they have to worry about where they like are gonna lose re-election, and so they can just kind of like get away with things. I'm saying, well, they do have like accountability because they do still have an impeachment
oh, Tom,
process
come on,
from
Tom.
the Senate.
If
What?
fucking Sam Alito showed up to the Supreme Court wearing a MAGA hat, he would. Do you think he would be impeached? Do you think he would be convicted in the Senate?
I
No.
do. So like even the last thing where the yard sign was in his lawn, that was investigated, and it turned out that it wasn't even like he wasn't there, and it was somebody, I think his wife like put their like summer house up for like a Airbnb or something, and then the people who were staying there put it up or something like that. It was like something that did have like a lot of disconnect from him, and they and so they just said like, yeah, well, then you're not allowed to like put your fucking summer house up for Airbnb or anything like that. Like it was something like that to where like, yeah, they did an investigation into it because it was like a worrying scenario. It just yeah, I do think that like, yeah, they could
MAGA
get
politicians stare in the face of unprecedented levels of corruption
Mhm.
from Trump and Musk and all these appointed members of the cabinet and their
Oh,
fellow
sure.
politicians
There's a very
on a
different
daily
Senate right here,
basis.
right now. Yes, sure. Yeah. The Senate that's there right now, maybe not. Yeah. Like, obviously, there was a Democratic majority Senate just a little while ago. This was when, like, these investigations
Well,
were
but a
done. But
Democratic you'd have to have 2/3 Democrats in the Senate to convict, or you'd have to have a 2/3 vote in the Senate to
yeah,
convict
super majority.
a judge for anything. And so barring committing murder on camera with some sort of biometric, incredibly clear evidence with, Clarence Thomas is holding his like Supreme Court issued ID to the camera as he shoots somebody and kills them. There's like no way I think that a Supreme Court justice would get impeached or convicted in the Senate. Um, in general, but that's another reason why I think that a jury system is probably better is because for better or worse, I mean, certainly I think for worse, like we tend to treat Supreme Court justices as essentially royalty, right? There's a lot of sort of, you know, air of elitism and like, oh, well, we can't go after this or that people. Like Biden had a lot of this when he was in office, right? Oh, the Supreme Court is sacred. We can't like
Hmm.
go after them or challenge them. And some presidents have had different views of that, but generally speaking, that's been the case. But if we had a 100-person jury and a judge was overseeing that case and saw that a member of the jury was talking about how much he loves Kamala Harris and like donated to Kamala Harris, in the midst of like deciding whether or not something with her legal situation would be decided, that judge would have no problem just kicking that dude right off the jury and replacing him with someone else, right? Because that's just a random person, right? And so I think that there's way less corruption in a system like that. I think there's a better sense of fairness and justice in a system like that. Um, and I think it
I would
takes
just have a lot
I mean,
less
it takes
faith in a system
all the
like that. Like
politics right out of
already,
it.
I already have like, I feel like one of the biggest flaws within our like system, and I do think it is as good as it can get, but I do think that one of the biggest flaws in our system is the jury, that like these aren't people who actually understand the law, and a lot of times they will have political
Why is
motivations
that a
already.
flaw?
Like what, well, no, it is a flaw. Like if we look at something like the OJ Simpson trial, where like those people get no
Hmm.
justice, they get no like sense of like, you know, there was some sort of consequence for somebody viciously murdering their daughter. Like there's nothing, they get nothing from
But
that
Tom, you
because
you would
it was
agree.
politically motivated, where a bunch of people like turned it into like a sense
Yeah.
of like white versus black, and so it was like justifiably so. But that's the reason that like politics should be as far outside of the justice system as possible. And I feel like, yeah, this is just one of
Yeah,
the,
but
that's
Tom,
a rarity. That's a rare time when that happens. I don't think that that's often, but that's what I'm saying, is that I do think our system is as good as it can get. It's just that that's one of the rare things that like happens that is a flaw within the system, and I would want to stay as far away from that, especially when we're talking about like uh, constitutional law.
well, look, I mean, I don't. I mean, you know, obviously, there's many, probably hundreds of cases a year of. I don't know if the number would literally be hundreds, but there's at least dozens of cases a year of violent murderers being convicted, found guilty by a jury of their peers, and depending on what study you believe, something like
Yeah, that, I would
99
say the majority
to
of, I would say
99.
99% of cases are probably like correct. I'm
Right. And to be fair, those are cases on strictly, like you said, factual grounds, right? Now,
mhm. Evidence,
it's
yeah.
not clear to me that a jury, right, it's not clear to me that a random jury of people who is asked not, "Hey, what is the fact of the matter when it comes to this?" but rather you have counsel on one side making an argument as to what should the law be interpreted as, what should it be, and then another counsel making the exact same argument but, in opposition, and then a group of our peers saying, well, just like, how should this law work, right? What should the interpretation of this statute be from, 300 years ago or whatever, right? Or 250 years ago or whatever. Um, I think that doesn't seem like a process that's outside the scope of an average person. Like they're just,
I think it
what's your
does.
intuition here?
I think it does, because even like when we're talking about like the the law, we're not just talking about what the words on the paper say, but we're also talking about precedent.
Of
We're
course,
talking about a ton of other court cases as well.
I
And we're
agree.
talking, and this is based on whether or not the lawyers who are arguing these cases go and do the research, or have been to college and been to school and got this information, got this
Absolutely.
education, and they know about the cases, they know what to go look for, or they know like this is all about their entire like 8-year education sometimes, and
Of
how
course.
much information they have to where they're able to use this to make the arguments. Whereas unless we're doing a supreme jury of lawyers like that, I don't mind that, but that's still going to have the
No,
same
but
like
Tom,
elitism of what
what's
it is that
wrong?
you're talking about.
But wrong, Tom, what is wrong with the idea of, instead of two, teams of counsel having to go in and convince the ideologically deeply predisposed judges, who almost certainly already know how they're going to rule on a case the exact moment that they read, what the case is about. What is the difference
Oh, I
between
highly
two
disagree
teams of
with that.
counsel? Well, I mean, that's somewhat semantical. Either way, what is the difference between two councils going in and having to convince that group of people versus having to structure an argument, determine, hey, what's the important thing here? How do we convince a group of our peers, 100 random Americans, what they should go with? And obviously, look, you should, obviously, if it's 100 people, you couldn't make it unanimous. I mean, I've heard suggestions of, you have to make it, in order for like a precedent to
You've heard
pass, you have to get two
suggestions? There's
thirds.
other people who think this thing?
Well, sortition is essentially what I'm describing, and sortition is not like a new concept. And so, for certain things, obviously, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to set a constitutional precedent, maybe you need 2/3 of your peers to agree that this precedent makes sense, right? Which puts the burden on
Right, but
sort
that's
of
why
a more
currently
static.
we have like the appellate process is a very long process, where you do have to go through like lower courts and even district court, or sorry, not district courts, um local courts where you finally get to the point where you're eventually getting to a Supreme Court, because they're all continuously making the same decisions, seemingly, that makes it more and more like obvious that there's so many judges coming to the same conclusion. And once you
but
get
if
to
you're the Supreme jury,
Court, you're talking about, what is it now, seven people on the Supreme Court who are all like making these decisions that sometimes are I think it's largely unanimous most of the time on the decisions that they come to. Like, this is, I feel like this has like a lot of protections built in already.
No, obviously there's a lot of protection. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a lengthy process by which you would get to the Supreme jury, right?
Well, I
Obviously,
know you're
the
not.
appeals process and all these things.
I think that you're talking about a bunch of protections that you would want, and I'm saying I feel like a lot of those like firewalls already exist within this lengthy process.
Well, obviously, the Supreme Court isn't truly all powerful. They can only hear a certain, like, they're logistically limited. They can only hear they can only do a certain amount of bad things, because they can't literally decide every single possible case, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in general, right? I think that that's, again, like, I don't think that procedurally there is a reason to think that a Supreme grand jury, as an example, I'm just calling it a Supreme grand jury, but essentially a jury of our peers could decide what are the important kind of appeals that the truly Supreme jury has to hear. So one, jury decides that, essentially a grand jury for the Supreme Court. And then another jury impaneled decides, well, what are the arguments on either side of this legal issue? And just like, what do we feel like is the right thing to do? Right. And I think that not only do I think absolutely that is what every judge is doing anyway. I don't think that judges have, for the most part, this kind of like, anti-principle philosophy where they're like, oh, I deeply disagree morally with this decision, but I'm going to write it anyway because I have this like strict adherence to my jurisprudence. I feel like that's an extremely rare thing to actually happen. So I think that the jury's doing that as well. And so at that point, the question becomes like, essentially, like, do we think that everyday people can make just moral judgments, right? Like, I think they can. I don't think there's a big problem with random people making that
Again,
decision, right? I mean,
I
it
don't
seems like
think
people
they
are.
are just making moral judgments. Is what I keep going back to. Like, and the point that I'm making with the process is not that like this is such a horrible idea, but I'm saying that like I can come up with all sorts of other things that we could do. Why don't we make guns where you pull the trigger with your thumb instead of your pointer finger? Like, we could do that. But I'm saying that like normally, if I'm coming up with some sort of idea to change something and fix something, normally it's because I think there's a serious problem with what it is we have, and we need to fix that problem. Whereas when you bring up problems, I'm saying, well, we already have a fix for that. That fix already exists there, and that I don't think that you're bringing up an actual problem when you bring this up. So I'm saying, what is it that like we're actually fixing? And when you bring up like, oh, well, it's a lengthy process or it's a fail-safe, I'm saying, well, those fail-safes exist currently, and I think the ones that exist currently are even like more fail-safey.
Well, I mean, I think that obviously from the perspective of somebody on the left, right, I would say that, if you had 9 members of the court who were on the left, I wouldn't necessarily feel like they're, how do I put this? Like, I would still feel like procedurally there's a problem that like a Supreme jury would still be better. Now, obviously, I would say that the outcomes of a 9-person left of center Supreme Court would be great. Like, I think it would be a good outcome sort of generating thing for me, but that doesn't mean that the procedural problems go away. I think that a lot of the injustice of our current system and like the disconnect that people feel with the Supreme Court would be solved if we did a jury system. But
what is the
I think that of course,
people, I haven't heard like what is the injustice that people feel with the Supreme Court?
Well, people, number one, I think that the approval rating of the Supreme Court is essentially the lowest that it's been ever. I mean, on record. It seems like it's a very unpopular institution currently, and we have to ask ourselves, well, why is that, right? And I think it's
I think all of our institutions are unpopular currently. I don't think that's something special for the Supreme Court. I think literally the populism within the country has made it to where all institutions are currently very unpopular.
Well, but the Supreme Court is ostensibly a very right-wing court, right? So at the very least, you'd expect it to have like, a 45%, approval rating or something, given how polarized the country is. But it doesn't have that. It's like a 20% approval rating, and I think
Yeah,
that's
but
in
even
some
Donald Trump
foundational.
in his first presidency barely, I think he averaged like a 29% approval rating throughout his entire term.
Oh,
Like
that's
he,
totally not true, Tom. Where are you getting that from?
what, what? Okay, Google.
Trump's average
What
approval
was
rating in his
Donald
first
Trump's
term was like
average approval
42%.
rating in his first term?
Bet money, bet $10.
I don't understand.
Okay. Yeah, you might. Okay, you might be right, but still, like we're talking about like a very low like approval rating where he can't even get like uh half the country
Well, I mean,
and he
yeah,
won the
40,
election.
45% of the
Like
country, sure.
yeah, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm
but
saying
that's
like
that's because we have two options, right? So I mean, we see this all the time in a lot of democratic systems where two candidates can be, oh, we have a runoff system. The top two candidates like have 20% approval ratings, but they were the top two, so now people have to choose between the two unpopular people. I mean, that's not our system's not quite as bad as that, but our system for a number of reasons, the candidates that we put forward tend to have like low net popularity ratings, but you know, one of them's got to get elected, right? It's a Democrat or Republican, right? And so, in general, I would just say that to answer your question originally, that the Supreme Court, I think, and part of the reason why it's unpopular, part of the reason why people feel that the Supreme Court is bad in a general sense, is because there is a fundamental disconnect by design, to be fair, between the Supreme Court and the people, right? And some people say that's a good thing. I just don't think it is, right? I think that in general, the court and our government at large, right, should have accountability to the people, and checks and balances between branches should still in some foundational sense be based on, what the view of the public is. And the Supreme Court just like doesn't it does the opposite of that, right? It doesn't take into consideration at all what the views of people are. But if it was a jury, well, it's a jury.
but
That's
I
it's the views
think
of
that
people.
is the point is that like it's not supposed to. Like it is
It's a bad
that
argument
like
though.
it's not that I don't think that's a bad argument. I think that if like the majority of the country decided that like we should make it illegal to like use slurs, I want I want the Supreme Court to be there to kind of be like, nah, like that's we have these protections like for a reason, and that this is if
Why
you
don't
guys
the
don't
Supreme jury
understand
could do
the
that?
Supreme, like if you guys don't understand these protections, then that's on you. But like we understand them, and we know that you guys are just much better off with these protections.
The Supreme jury is still a check on mob rule, right? So like this is not again like this isn't like this is
But you're
the
saying that you would want them to make decisions based on what's popular and what it is that people want. So
well,
it's
I say
not a check on
popular.
mob rule.
No. If I wanted them to do decisions that were popular, I would say that the Supreme Court should just be elected, right? When I say popular in this sense, I'm not saying, oh, just do whatever a majority of people want or whatever. What I'm saying is that people on the jury, these 100 people who are guided by a judge who, evaluate arguments by trained lawyers, they are regular people, right? And so these people, the decisions that they make, in some sense, is reflective of a sort of procedural popular will that we would have. It's not just voting, in a detached way on what should or shouldn't happen. It's a guided process where people are given relevant information and they have to come to a reasonable conclusion, just like a jury in a criminal or civil trial or grand jury. The only difference is that the decisions that they would be making would be, oh, the state of Kentucky just said if saying the word trans comes with $100 fine, right? Like as an example, like similar to what you said. Do we think that that should be allowed, right? Under our constitutional rights, like, do we think our Constitution allows for the government to be able to fine you for saying certain words? Um, and my expectation would be that a group of 100 random Americans guided through, a constitutional process by a judge and by trained lawyers would probably come to the decision, well, no, yeah, like the government can't just fucking fine you for, even though Kentucky voted on this or whatever, the government can't just fine you for saying the word trans, right? That's probably unreasonable. And, I think that process will work out pretty well. The founding fathers they thought regular people could decide, I guess, pretty important legal matters, in terms of the consequences you face from the law. And so I just think we should go, we should really just maximize the founding fathers' principles and go one step further. Well, a couple steps further and do a supreme jury instead, But obviously, the last thing I'll say is that, that's a very, that's a utopian thing to think. I think that your best bet would be like the Democrats changing, how Supreme Courts are appointed and maybe putting an extra couple of Supreme Court justices on the court and something like that, recusal rules, right? I don't think we're going to be getting a Supreme Jury anytime soon.
Well, yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, it just it sounds like a ridiculous idea to me. Like it just sounds like, yeah, I want
Listen,
people who are like,
if regular juries aren't ridiculous, Tom, then the Supreme Jury can only be so
again,
ridiculous.
they're just, I think that they're much different things. I like the idea of juries, but in those cases, they are there with a judge as a referee to like make sure that they
look up,
get all of these things. And I think that in this case, we have a jury of judges that currently exists, and that is a good
Look
idea
up,
to me. Which
might be
Chad
helpful
is
for you
saying that
to
I'm like closer to right on Trump's approval ratings, but I can't find anything. Like I can't. I've clicked on.
just look up Trump approval 538 and just like look at the line.
I pulled up
It's like
538, and all it's
very
doing is
clear.
pulling up a bunch of fucking articles from 530. Maybe I clicked on the wrong thing. Yeah, no, it's just pulling up articles about Trump from 538. This is insane. Like this is driving me crazy.
Yeah, but just put the
Oh, my
you can
mic's going
copy
out.
the oh sorry you can copy the what do you call it? You can I'll send you the way back on the 538 website. 538 recently got shut down.
Oh, did it?
But you can pull up the way back on 538 and just like I'll send it to you really quick. It's only gonna take me a second, but anyway, that's kind of irrelevant to the point. I'll send you it after the
Why
conversation.
did it get shut down?
Um,
I need that website. Why did it get shut down? Why?
Disney decided, it wasn't making enough money for Disney, so they shut it down.
No, bro.
No more 538.
I on election night, I came on and I talked to you about like, progressives, like kind of like being a problem within the electoral process to get Democrats elected, and I had said that like I'd called it like 6 weeks before, or sorry, it was like 3 or 4 weeks before the election that Trump was going to win all of the swing states, and that this was like purely based on polling. And in the last couple of elections, I've gotten like almost exactly what they were going to get each time based on just my own like analyzing 538 polling. And who was the other group? New York Times, which they come to almost the exact same numbers every single time with the New York Times. But yeah.
Yeah, why'd you bring that up?
Because I want their polling. Their polling is like, it's so much better than everybody else's, where they have like a really good process for how they decide which polls are actually going to be admitted into their overall numbers, into their like into their, I don't know what you call it, but they have like every poll from everybody, yes, and they it's not even like, it's aggregates, yes, for like state by state, national polling, like they do everything in these massive aggregates where they take tons of polling from tons of different networks and use their numbers to come to an overall. And yeah, going through all of those numbers is just so good. But yeah, there's like nothing on the 538 website now.
I like 538. Yeah, unfortunately, they're getting shut down. But I'd imagine. I mean, Nate Silver, to be fair, kind of spun off his own team, so maybe the Silver Bulletin will just essentially become 538 2.0, because they're doing, presumably doing a lot of the same shit that 538 was doing. So I wouldn't really worry about it too much. But I think, I think overall, yeah, your best bet for the Democrats is just to I mean, Democrats won't even, I don't even. I just feel like the Democrats aren't going to do shit about the Supreme Court. Honestly, I feel like you're not going to get like anything, but from the even if the Democrats win, you'd have to have like President AOC with fucking 65 Democratic senators to get like meaningful
I mean, I know
Supreme
a
Court.
lot of people really don't like the broad immunity case, but for the most part, I felt like they've made like really good decisions, and that I've agreed with almost everything um that they've come out with, and I know that like this is
You think
part
that
of like
this Supreme Court, this current inclination, has made mostly? Well, it depends on what you mean by mostly. Like, obviously, if you look at like all the trivial cases that nobody reports on, I mean, maybe a
well,
lot of
like
those are
I
reasonable.
was
But
talking about earlier that they had like I think it was like 30 different 20 28 29 like different cases trying to challenge the election, and some of them are like overall challenges, some of them are just state by state challenges, some of them are like county challenges,
Mhm.
and uh they refused all of these. Like they said that every single one of them didn't even have enough like
yeah,
evidence for them to hear the case. So like I feel like a lot of people looked at them as just this group that's just there to do Donald Trump's bidding. But then when it came to like the most important decisions for them to make, they didn't make those decisions. I understand why the broad immunity case
yeah.
is like super inconvenient, and there's like one main part that I don't like about it, but I think the overall decision was correct. And the problem that I even have with the one small thing that I have, I know I've been like going for a minute on this, but
You
the
think the overall decision was good? Like, was reasonable?
I think that it was consistent like with the law. Like I think that when you look at the fact that the somebody who has immunity for something, that they are technically, yeah, like not able to be charged with it, they're not able to like testify on it or be like um there's a lot of things that like go into it, but yes, based on the law, I felt like it was consistent with what it is that with the decision that they were supposed to make. And from what I remember, it was unanimous as well. Like it wasn't even just like the Trumpers that made that decision. It was a unanimous decision from everybody.
From you're talking about the immunity case?
Yeah,
No, the immunity case was it was 6-3. To be fair, Barrett
said that
she
she regretted her decision
concurred.
or something.
I don't
Yeah,
know if she said
yeah, she
she it would
concurred, and then I think later she said that she regretted her decision or something like that.
I don't recall her. Maybe she did. I don't know. That would surprise me, but hopefully she does. I mean, a terrible decision, obviously, if you ask me. I mean, I think you know, in general, I think that um, the idea, in some foundational sense, like again, I recognize I take a more radical view on this. Like, I think even people like Pisco would say, like, yeah, like there's a problem if there's a problem if like the president speeds and then the president has to go to court for a speeding ticket. Meanwhile, I take the position of like that there's no problem at all. If you broke the fucking law, Mr. President, you have to go through whatever the normal
Yeah, you're right. It was
accountability for
six
that
three.
is, right? I mean,
Yeah, you're right. It was 6-3.
you know, it was six to
Okay,
three,
yeah,
but
I was it was
Comey
it is
Barrett.
9 people. I for some reason I was thinking there's 7 on the Supreme Court, but it is 9.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, I didn't hear you say there were 7. But yeah, there's 9 people on the Supreme Court. That's the number of positions, but yeah, I mean, I think
Well, I do
obviously,
think
I think
that
that the Democrats.
there's a problem with like any sort of court having any sort of power over the sitting president. They're like, and that they're so like right now, Fulton County still has charges against Donald Trump for his attempt to steal the election, right? And they're charging him with
Hmm.
racketeering. The fact that they would be able to like subpoena him, tell him he has to show up in court, put him in jail, possibly. Like the fact that they would be able to have any sort of power over the president is insanely dangerous, because not only can that be used like politically or but even like as for like foreign threats, like it can be used in so many different ways that the nobody should ever have that sort of power over our president. He has to have like a very broad amount of power to be able to do what it is that he wants. And I do think that yes, like while they are a sitting president, that we shouldn't be able to do anything. The parts that I was disagreeing with is that um the the fact that they're not even able to testify on things that happen kind of drives me a little crazy. That is again like what the law says for like, immunity, is that you can't even like compel them to testify. But it just seems wrong that like if something happens in front of the president, they can just choose not to go and testify for a case, and then and if they're the only witness, like there's just nothing we can do about it. I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the court, obviously, I think in some functional sense, there's a reason to say that, hey, while you're in office, I don't know, state charges have to be. There should be some process, obviously, for reviewing them. Oh, state charges have to be reviewed by the state Supreme Court, or they have to be reviewed by, some sort of, shared governance of the district courts or something like that. I mean, there's a way to do state charges that's within reason that allows the executive to not be constantly just caught up in political court cases. But I think the idea of like, oh yeah, no, if
Well,
the
currently
I
the
don't know, what's
lower
like a
courts just
state
decide whether
crime.
or not it is part of his official duties. And so when the lower courts decide, okay, this is or if they say it is not a part of his official duties as the president, then you can go and charge him with whatever it is. And and obviously, yeah, like you'll be able to go through the process now. So it's not saying that like you're not able to charge him for anything whatsoever. It's saying, well, yeah, you can't charge him for something that is like his official duty. You can't go in like if he orders somebody to go kill Osama bin Laden, tells SEAL Team 6 to go kill Osama bin Laden. Like, yeah, we can't have somebody come out and be like, oh, that actually qualifies as murder one, and he is an accessory to a crime now. And like, yeah, I don't think that that's something that like it can happen. And I think that like the consistency within the law is going to have a lot of problems if they do start to allow things that are within his job description to be challenged in that way. But if they're outside of his job description, he's already able to get charged with it. So that makes sense to me.
I mean, we'll see. Like, obviously the right wingers on the Supreme Court, they said in the decision itself, they said, look, I mean, the what is it? The dissent is basically overreacting to this, right? Look, this isn't actually that crazy of a decision. We're not creating some kind of king here. And we'll see, because I'm sure that Trump's doing
But
illegal
again,
things as we speak,
all of
right?
the cases that were against him, they appealed all of these on those grounds to say, yeah, they're not allowed to charge us anymore. The Supreme Court decided they're not allowed to charge us anymore. And all of those got upheld. None of those charges got dropped based on his broad immunity. Nobody was like Jack Smith wasn't like, oh, we don't get to charge him now because the Supreme Court said so. Like, no, they were still things that were outside of his official duties
Well,
that he
but
was getting charged for.
Eileen
So.
Cannon, if I'm not mistaken, Eileen Cannon
Eileen Cannon
immediately
Eileen Cannon did, but
like
she made a
she,
decision based on something completely. She
based
had
on
him
being
rewrite it.
corrupt.
She had him rewrite
Yeah.
it. She had him rewrite the case to where he had to rewrite it in a way to where it wasn't like just things that were inside of his uh um inside of his official duties. But then yeah, the part that I would say was like seemed more corrupt was when she tried to say that Jack Smith wasn't legally allowed to be on the case, and so the entire like charges were illegal now. That part was some fucking bullshit, but that still didn't have anything to do with the broad immunity.
Well, right, but that's again, like, that's an example of the reason she did that was because Clarence Thomas, in one of his decisions, basically said, "Hey, hint, nod, and wink. I actually don't think that special counsels like this are properly appointed. I don't think they're constitutional." And Eileen Cannon, based off of the sort of offhand comment of a judge who was effectively prejudging an issue from a case that wasn't even involved in that, wasn't even asking that question. She says, based on that one judge who she cited one judge on the Supreme Court and said, "Oh, that's why I'm making this decision to quash this investigation." Completely insane. Again, I just think like
Yeah.
we give the Supreme Court an insane amount of power. It is insane how much power the Supreme Court has. It really is. Like, the idea that you are functionally unaccountable, that you can essentially decide in any way you want what the law is, right?
Well,
I
I
mean,
wouldn't be
clearly the
against
Supreme Court.
expanding it, like, because even when you say like 100 people on a jury, like I still would want those 100 people to be like a lawyer or a judge or like something, yeah, with some sort of background in this area to where they are, because I do think that these things are difficult. I think that like even when we're talking about the broad immunity case, I think that like people's understanding of these cases is like it's a really difficult thing to understand because the Constitution and precedent and the way that these laws work, I think that it all is very complicated. And for like random people, working on a farm, to be able to go and start making like constitutional decisions, like constitutional law is like the highest like and most difficult form of law that we have in the country, and now we're saying like, oh well, yeah, even though it is like by far like the biggest part of everything that we do, like, yeah, we'll just have like just about anybody make these decisions. Yeah, of course.
Well, yeah, but again, you're making. I just feel like people who say this kind of thing, it's like, look, I understand. Look, most people are not informed on like complex political issues. If you ask the average person, like on my Substack, I'm doing a series on what's the best,
Not that they're not
tax
informed,
policy for the left, right?
they are like insanely uninformed, right? Where like there would be a large amount of people who think that like Donald Trump's charges, all of them were politically motivated just because they all came out at the same time, right? Like they're getting their news from like random people on
right,
Twitter
but again,
and people like
Tom,
Tim Pool and shit like this. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but Tom, again, like the jury, if you're like Tim Pool would literally never be selected to be on any sort of jury involving anything having to do with Donald Trump.
Sure.
Like it just wouldn't happen because it's obvious that he has prejudgment, right?
Of
course. And so that would be the same thing with you'd have rules like that with the Supreme Jury, right? And so
yeah, I get
it's really just a question of like, do we think that in some foundational sense, essentially, do we think that people can make interpretive decisions about like regular people? Can they make interpretive decisions about law in like a functional, competent way? And I mean, I just have no reason to think that they couldn't, right? I mean, I think that obviously you might say, well, they might decide stupid shit. It's like, I'm sure maybe that's possible, right? But judges decide stupid shit.
It's not even. I'm not even saying that like I would like necessarily disagree with their decisions or anything like that. It's more about I'm talking about like the process in and of itself, and like the fact that like, yeah, they might come to the right decision. This is probably going to be a very uninformed decision one way or the other. So like that's the issue that I have, is that yeah, even the people that are currently in there, even if I think they're politically motivated, I think that they're at least making like a very informed decision. Yeah.
Take the abortion case, and I can't remember the name of it actually.
Roe v. Wade,
but the
newer
not
one,
Roe v. Wade, the one that overturned Casey or whatever. I don't know. I don't remember the name of the case, but the case that basically got rid of abortion, right? Protections on a federal level.
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't an average person come to a decision? Like, what do you think goes wrong when an average person is asked, should the Constitution protect a woman's right to an abortion? Like, what goes wrong with an average group of people being asked that question to deliberate that question?
But that's not the question. That's my point, is that isn't the question. They're not asking, should she have the right to do this? They're asking, is there a, where does the Constitution say that she has this right? And I would say the Constitution does say it, but not where the Supreme Court decided in Roe v. Wade, and then it made sense to me that Roe v. Wade would get overturned. It's just that I think that there has to be another decision based on like, equality. It was saying that like, yes, this is like a, we're putting like undue burdens on women that will never be put on men, and so now we have like a problem with equal
but Tom,
treatment under the law.
The council arguing that in front of the Supreme Jury could make that very case, and I think that sounds like a very reasonable argument to make.
But again, they weren't
arguing
over
Supreme Jury
whether
could evaluate that.
they weren't arguing over whether or not they should have something that says abortion should be legal. They're arguing over whether or not the decision that's already made is constitutional under the law, and whether or not
Right.
Roe v. Wade is constitutional. There would have to be another case that challenges on equality in order for this to be the case. But currently, that's like in the Roe v. Wade case that where it got overturned, that wasn't the
Well, but
challenge. And so
just replicate the arguments in front of the supreme jury, right? So like, okay, one side says, "Hey, this case that was decided 50 years ago, we actually think it's unconstitutional. Here's why we
Mhm.
think that." And then the other side says, "Well, no, actually Roe v. Wade is totally constitutional. Here's why we think that." And then a judge is there to provide guidance, to define things, to answer questions. Obviously,
Yeah, but I would
you
say
know, not
Roe
a
v. Wade was unconstitutional. It was a decision made on privacy, and that it should have been made on equality. And because they made it on privacy, the Casey or Anthony or whatever case ended up
Casey
overturning
Anthony.
it. Yeah, well, that's what I'm pretty sure it is something like that. But I chat. Can one of y'all look this up so I can so we don't keep saying the
Fucking
whatever case?
uh, Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
Is that
That
what
was
it was?
no.
Planned
You're thinking
Parenthood versus
you're
Casey.
you're thinking of the you're
I know
thinking of
who
the
Casey
reaffirmation.
Anthony
It's
is.
the
But
Dobbs decision. The Dobbs decision got
Dobbs
rid of
decision. Okay.
the
You're right.
Dobbs decision got rid of abortion. But yeah. I mean, I think obviously these are complex questions. I mean, I think and like how exactly you would structure a supreme jury decision is kind of important because, in my view, like obviously this would be a thought out kind of moderated caucus process where the jury would have time to deliberate and they would be able to openly discuss this kind of thing like a normal jury,
Mhm.
and that could be moderated by like a chair who's kind of appointed or whatever, like a bureaucrat or something who like oversees the procedure, um, and that same person could help them formulate just like, hey, so you know what exactly are the 50% or 2/3 of people, what are you guys actually deciding, and come to a consensus, write it down, vote on that piece of paper. This is what the decision is, right? And
Mhm.
that's essentially the same process that each individual Supreme Court justice goes through, and then they come together to kind of combine their opinion and come to a final decision on things. But we're just kind of decentralizing that process into a jury of Americans, essentially, right? And I think that would be a functional process that would provide good guidance to lawyers and judges and police officers and economic actors, right, for what the law is in the future. I don't think that would be that big of a hurdle to come over, right? Any more so than like a vague or potentially difficult to understand Supreme Court decision would be. I mean, we just talked about the case that potentially makes the president a king. Does it really? I don't. We got to figure that out. It's kind of it's hard to say, right? So
Well, I don't know.
the Supreme
What
Jury can
is
make
a
the same
naked
decisions.
short?
It's a good question. What is a naked short?
Yeah, you can't even tell me that. And you went to school for
True.
this stuff, so I don't know, man.
Yeah, I know what a naked short is, but I don't. Why did that come up today? I know you mentioned it.
There was somebody who was talking about the fact that like when there's like a massive amount of corruption in our country right now, and one of the biggest issues is the naked shorts. And I was like, wait, what? Why naked shorts? They're like, cause I forget what exactly what company it was, but some company got sued because they were like changing the market pretty drastically by shorting it. But then the decision was like, well, no, they're market makers. So yes, they are supposed to like change the market. That's what they're supposed to do. But when they're changing it in this case, they're harming the market instead of actually like making it better. And so the yeah, people were acting like this was a bunch of corruption, but I was like, I went and read a bit about it, and I'm like, I have no idea, dude. I don't know. And you came in the middle of that conversation, and so I was like, oh, maybe he could have like actually explained it to me, and I just didn't even think to ask.
Oh, naked shorts. I mean, I just understand naked shorts to be kind of a fraudulent way to do shorts where you essentially you short a stock, but before the transaction's actually approved, you
Yeah, you
start
don't even have the stocks to short it.
right. But I mean, I don't know how maybe that's a broad issue in our economy. I don't I don't imagine it is, but maybe it is a really, really giant problem in our economy. I can't imagine it is though. I think the biggest problems in our economy are not really I don't think very conspiratorial, they're just kind of staring us in the face and we're not doing anything about it, for various reasons. So we got a whole bunch of poverty and inequality, and the data, it's out there. It reflects this, but we just we don't have the right policies in place to address them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm pretty like furious over this whole thing because I am like furiously anti-populist and generally like a very annoyed with progressives and shit. But Donald Trump has made all of the things that I say don't exist just blatantly exist in the worst way possible. So,
Like what?
like
What did he bring into existence?
like bringing all of his like billionaire friends in and just like giving he like personally they're all like making a lot of money off of like being part of his administration. His first administration, he made
Yes.
millions of dollars even just on Mar-a-Lago alone. Like he like didn't even stay in the White House for a large part of his administration, and all these
He's
people
working
are like,
remotely, Tom.
yes, well, all these people whine and cry about like Biden not being in the White House and that he's not even president because he's not there. But then you go look and see Trump spent more time out of the White House than he did because he was staying at Mar-a-Lago. And he was staying at Mar-a-Lago because he was able to charge the suite to the White House the entire time. And that we have like tons of FOIA requests that show that like the American taxpayers paid millions of dollars to Mar-a-Lago alone. Like that's just one company that he sent millions of dollars
Right.
to. We know that the recently there was this big controversy over the fact that Rachel Maddow had said that Elon like got a big contract for the Cybertruck and that Donald Trump gave it to him, and they said no, actually we ended that contract. That was signed under Biden, and we ended it. But then just recently they reinstated it for way more money, like way more money. Like it was like a much smaller contract the first time under Biden. Now it's a much bigger contract, and they just did it again for the same fucking Tesla truck. And
Yeah.
it's
I used to be. Yeah, I used to be more like I used to be more indifferent to the idea of like should billionaires exist? Like, I mean, I don't know if we should really kind of target an upper bound on wealth, and I still think fundamentally I don't know that you should have a maximum amount of wealth or um even a wealth tax itself. I mean, I think that a wealth tax itself could be good, it could be bad. But I do think that wealth inequality is clearly a very big problem. Like I think that it's a very big problem when the richest person in the world is so rich that they could put $1 million in every single member of the House's reelection campaign, and that is like a trivial cost to them. That is a problem.
Yeah,
that is a problem. And I mean that's a level of wealth that is clearly when the richest person in the world is so rich that they can buy an entire media company and just start spreading propaganda
just for fun.
that's a problem. Yeah, like and that's a problem. Those are problems in part based on like what we legally allow people to do with their money. Like I just don't think I don't think money should be in politics, and I don't think rich people should be able to buy media companies. Media should be organized in a very different way. But when it comes to just like being that rich and just like being able to buy influence in that way and have that amount of economic power sort of centralized into one person, that's clearly a big problem. It's just a systemically risky thing for a number of reasons. But luckily, there's good ways. You don't have to expropriate wealth or anything like that. There's good ways to, we could probably reduce wealth inequality by like, I mean, a lot without doing stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
we could reduce it by a very, very, very substantial amount.
Well, even
But
but I'm most of my stuff is like wealth inequality is one thing, but like if there's like trillionaires all over the place, but people have like their basic necessities and are able to like uh you know live and like get everything that they need and all of their needs are met, like I don't really like care so much about the inequality of it as much as I care about like whether or not people are able to get those things. And when this administration is just blatantly taking away all of those things, and it's a bunch of fucking billionaires who are doing it, taking away like dialysis medicine. I got a guy in my community who's supposed to be delivering dialysis medication to people, and now they froze their ability to deliver it, even though they already bought all the medicine. And you want to talk about waste? Like, you want to talk about waste in the government? They have made it to where they are literally like they've spent all of this money already on all of this medication for all of these people, and now it can't even go to the people. They can't even get it. This is the same with like tons of food,
yeah,
where they've already like gotten tons of food for people, and they can't even deliver the food now, and the food's going bad, and like it's just that that is so much waste. But then on top of that, I don't know if you saw the presentation that was given in the Senate the other day, but they or maybe it was in the House, but he went over the fact that like all of the people who work for Trump now and had like any sort of like charges or criminal charges, like all of these departments have just disappeared, as well as their charges. Like they're all just gone, and they can't. They're just like getting rid of all of these different groups that are investigating their friends or who are gonna find them or like whatever. It's just a ton of different ways to make it to where they have every ability to get away with like the grossest corruption that you could imagine. So yeah, it's like this is the shit that I think the far left and the far right have always complained about, and especially they normally like bring in Jews and shit into the thought process. But now it is actually happening very blatantly, very clearly, and there's the people who are supposedly populist and against corruption and against all waste and against taxes and against all of these things are watching the exact opposite of what they were promised happen to them and cheer it on at the same time. So yeah, this is
yeah. Well,
very
look, I mean,
very
I think
disheartening.
obviously you should definitely care about inequality, even if people have their basic needs met. Because again, it is kind of a systemic issue at a certain point, right? Like even if everyone like poor people in America are people say this, poor people. I think this is wrong for some reasons, but people will say poor people in America are very well off compared to poor people in many other countries, right? And it's like, well, this is true in a number of ways, but kind of a red herring. But at the end of the day, though, just because poor people in America are relatively well off, and even if this world that you describe, where like, oh, poor people are extremely well taken care of, relative to today, but oh, there's a bunch of these trillionaires just kind of floating around. The problem is that, but they're not truly floating around, right? Like at the end of the day, that amount of wealth is power. It's very like real power in a real sense, right? It's power to move markets, it's power to make gigantic sweeping economic decisions which affect the lives of so many others. It's state violence in a certain extent, right? When you have
Yeah, sure. I agree with like a
assets.
bunch of different ideas of like getting money out of politics. I think there's somebody in my community who talked about the fact that in their country they do just take like uh donations out of politics to where everything that they would possibly need to get their message out is already set up for them ahead of time to where
It's not just
they
politics
have
though, just
like
in the private world. Like just like privately, forget about politics. Just like the amount of economic power one individual has is a systemically risky thing, right? You want to have more distributed economic power. In my view, for a number of reasons. I mean, both for what we might think to be efficiency reasons, but also in part, you know, community and equality for equality's sake, and the the sort of potential injustices in the economy that would be suffered of people on account of the ultra wealthy making decisions that they would with their wealth, right? I mean, that can be a very bad thing to happen, and that only happens because people are able to, people have an ability to concentrate their wealth to like some crazy degree, right?
I don't know. The other
You
day
know,
you were in my chat. I don't know if you're just memeing, but I feel like I remember you going and debating Vosh on whether or not socialism was a good idea. And then the other day you were in my chat over and over just saying, well, let's just do socialism. Like, let's just be socialists. Like, I
yeah.
don't know if you're memeing now or if you're actually like an economist who leans towards socialism.
Well,
But
Vosh's socialism is a very bad model of socialism because
I feel
Vosh's
like it is
model is
like the
basically
only one that makes sense to me outside. Like, it's the only type of socialism,
no.
market socialism, where you literally use the market still, but you have everything in co-ops to where the people are like democratically engaging in everything that happens with their workplace. Like that seems like the best, like the best system for socialism outside, because
No.
everything else is like centralized. And
No, it's bad. It's because it's bad for quite a lot of reasons. I mean, to be fair, if Vosh doesn't really do debates anymore, but if I could talk to Vosh again about this, I would have actually, I think, much even like more reasons to doubt his model. Maybe I'll make another video on it, but um, worker cooperatives are bad because they're very static. They actually lead themselves to high levels of inequality relative to alternatives for a number of reasons. And they also lead to very high unemployment and allocative efficiency problems. Because it's just it's very like illiquid way to manage wealth. Like, okay, like the way that you access wealth and wealth planning is through working for a specific company. Like, that's kind of dumb, right? And so the best model for socialism, in my view, would be a wealth fund model where you essentially have a sovereign wealth fund that is professionally managed. Like, you have all the same exact management, but it's just public wealth instead of private wealth. So essentially take, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund and just make it the entire market. Now, I think that there's reason to believe that that would probably lead to some inefficiency and not necessarily the best outcomes for people, and not even necessarily like outcomes that would be desirable to most people for various reasons. Like, I think that, if faced with those two alternatives, people might just say, hey, on a balance of my principles, I would just pick the society that has some private ownership, right? And I think that that's reasonable. Um, I think it's fair to say that, look, I'm an egalitarian. The only way to accomplish a truly egalitarian society is a socialist economic mode of production. But egalitarianism isn't my only value, right? You have to balance your other values and kind of like come to a reasoned decision. There's a book called The Public Wealth of Cities, and it's a follow-up to The Public Wealth of Nations
oh, great
by
books.
this Oh, you've read them before?
No, I have no idea what you're talking about. Sorry.
Oh, god damn it, Tom, you fucking bitch. No, but The Public Wealth of Nations, it's this guy wrote a book basically talking about how governments can manage public wealth in a very efficient way, using essentially good institutional design. And I think that that's right. I think that you could collectivize like a majority of the wealth in the country, and the only outcome that would lead to is like just the better ones, right? It would lead to radically more equal levels of equality. It would provide thousands and thousands of dollars a year in income to regular people from capital, which
I
would be
think you
great.
can. Yeah, it's the like. I don't have a problem with those sorts of things. I think that the the process of getting there is the thing that like most people disagree on, and I think that like you can do these things through like obviously like higher taxes over time to where eventually you're able to get to that point. Unfortunately, we're literally having trouble just like getting enough taxes to pay for our fucking social security for our for our older generations, or for our younger generations right now. And so it's
But
I
Tom, that's a lie. That's a lie, Tom.
well,
Because in fact,
it's not a lie that they like they uh like mathematically will go under. It's just that they have the ability to fix it.
No, that's true. That's true. That's what I was going to say, was that the tax money exists to solve these problems, right?
Yeah.
It's just we kind of we decide to we're like the meme where the guy is like, his head is just barely peeking above water, but he's actually only in like 3 feet of water. We're just like choosing to be dramatic about things.
Yep.
And that's kind of how it works. But I don't know. We hopefully Trump doesn't end democracy, and we make it to 28. And President AOC can implement all
Yeah, I
these
was gonna
great
say you
things.
can get your AOC revolution.
Exactly. I mean, if things get as bad as I imagine, at the very least, if Trump does what he says he's going to do, and things get as bad as I imagine, then President AOC doesn't sound like such an unrealistic prospect at that point.
Yeah, I was telling
But
somebody else the other day, like at this point, I almost think I would rather the fucking communists take over and just if they did a revolution tomorrow, I might just be right there next to them with
well, come on.
with my
Obviously,
hammer and sickle.
AOC would be, even if you're not a socialist, AOC would absolutely be a better president than Donald Trump. I mean, that's
Yeah,
not
sure.
can't even be questioned. Yeah,
Yeah,
of
sure.
course.
I'm not like a huge AOC fan, but I obviously I think just about anybody would be a better president than Donald Trump.
Exactly.
I don't
But
think
anyway, all
things
right. Well,
could get
Tom, it
much
was good
worse.
talking.
Yeah, I appreciate you
Is there
hopping
anything
on.
else you wanted
It's
to
good.
discuss,
No.
brother?
Oh, I might be setting up some panels soon if I could get you that debate with Vosh, because I've actually talked to him a couple of times about him coming on and debating people, and he said that he's always open to it. He just each time he wants to decide one by one. If I could, I wanna start doing like a lot more debates on my channel. It's just that the only reason that I haven't done it in a while is because I feel like there's like a huge lack of actual talent to do these things, but I would definitely I would definitely be interested in hosting that if you'd be down to do it.
Yeah, sure. I'll definitely debate Vosh on what the best model of socialism is, and why I think his model is worse than other models of socialism. And that could be an interesting discussion because my opinions have evolved a lot since I last spoke to Bosch. I still fundamentally hold like all of the same opinions that I have in that debate. I think like where his model is very bad, but I'm a lot less capitalist than I used to be.
I was gonna say I
For
thought that you
various
were a
reasons.
capitalist. There's a clip of me reviewing that debate where you went in and at the beginning you say you're like your fans say that I'm like a little bit too idealistic and I just go off for a while. I'm like, oh yes, it's the capitalists who are so idealistic. Yes, it's the ones who say, I want things to be the way that they are right now. That's so idealistic. That's just such an idealistic way of thinking. You'll never get things to be the way that they are now. How could you possibly think that would ever happen? Like, yeah, that was so I was wondering, like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I said that he was a capitalist. Maybe I just totally misunderstood that point.
Yeah, I used to call myself a capitalist. I mean, I think the problem with such a label is that it's just it's way too absolutist, really. I mean, there's this guy named Matt Brunig who is he's the one good socialist. No, but he's a pretty good socialist who um he made the point actually during a discussion that I had. It was a very kind of transformative discussion in hindsight where this was like the first time that I spoke to a socialist that had good answers to my questions was when I spoke to Matt Brunig. And it really made me think. One of the things that he said was, I kind of like to think about socialism as on the institutional level, where like countries are kind of made up of capitalist and socialist institutions, right? Where you might think of like the USPS as a socialist institution because it's a publicly owned, collectively owned enterprise, right? You might think of, fire departments or police or public schools as the same thing.
Sure, I would
These
say
are
there's social programs, but sure, I get your point.
well, but what they are is they're means of production that are owned collectively, right?
They're socially
And
funded.
well, but that doesn't mean that they're not means of production that are owned collectively, though, right? So obviously,
Kinda, because
you're
isn't if we actually own the means of production, aren't we actually making like more direct decisions with more direct democracy that's going to be involved? Where like
we are though. I mean, think about public schools, right? I mean, public schools have democratically elected board members who decide how the production is managed, and those are members of the community typically, and public employees, and tax dollars, and I mean, we could have a privately owned, privately funded education system, but we don't. We have a publicly owned, publicly funded education system, and that's that's a socialist mode of production, right? And it's democratic ownership essentially, right? And there's many different ways that you can do socialist ownership. Vosh says do everything with worker cooperatives. But state industry, state services, consumer cooperatives, sovereign wealth fund ownership, like I described earlier, those are all different ways to take all the capital and collectivize it. And that's, socialist. But then there's a lot of capitalist institutions as well. Walmart, privately owned, for-profit grocery store. It's a capitalist institution, right? Privately owned means of production. But if we were to take that same grocery store and say the stock is now owned by the U.S. government, well, now it's socially owned production, right? And so it becomes a socialist institution at that point. And you see this in other countries where they have collectively owned grocery stores. And so, what Matt Brunig would say is that obviously he would call himself a socialist. He would say whole enchilada, let's fucking collectivize everything. Whereas I would say, I'm pretty far to the. If you endorse the Nordic model, you endorse like mostly collective ownership. You're mostly socialist if you think the Nordic model is good. And I think we should go further than the Nordic model. So I would call myself, I don't know, two-thirds socialist or something. I don't know. But it doesn't make much sense to say it that way. I think mixed model production makes the most sense right now. And of the private ownership that exists, you should have a union, you should have worker board membership, stuff like that.
Okay. Well,
there you go. Well, if you can get Vosh to agree to that debate, make it happen, Tom.
Yeah,
it'll be a fun one.
I'll see what I can do, because that would definitely be a fun one.
When are you gonna start doing these panels? Next couple of weeks, or?
Yeah, so the first one we're probably gonna do like a Russia-Ukraine one. They're supposed to be a bit similar to the Piers Morgan ones, where like in the past, like doing a more open, just like hey, just argue, and I'll just like make sure that people get their speaking time, and like I'll make sure that like there's not too much interrupting and crap like that. Whereas like now it seems like those are just obnoxious, and it's everybody like just trying to yell and put on a show and be overly performative. In a way that you don't actually get any information. So the way that Piers Morgan does it is you still get to be overly performative and put on a show, but you're actually able to like relay a good amount of information at the same time. And so having like an overtly moderated panel to where everything is like, I ask you a question, you answer the question, then I kind of take your answer, turn it into like a question for the other person. Hey, so they said this. What do you think that makes sense? Do you think this is the best way to do it? Blah, blah, blah. Their answer, take that, turn it into a question for you, and then eventually like allow it to get more. Moderation. Yes, allow it to get like more and more open throughout the conversation, to where the two of you are more and more having like a back and forth engagement. But yes, just like a lot more active moderation. Exactly.
Yeah, that one British Jewish guy who does a lot of Israel-Palestine debate moderation, he basically moderates that way. I think his name is Eli. I can't remember his name.
Okay, yeah. Kind of like a nerdy looking guy, like really skinny.
Yeah,
glasses. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, he
like
basically moderates that way. And I think that's a pretty good way to moderate overall. I tend to take that approach when I organized a debate between Yarn Brook and Matt Brunig. I moderated that way, which I think that leads to good. I think that leads to pretty good discussion for the most part. Yeah, most panels are really blood sportsy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, for somebody like Destiny, that, and even like I would say in the way that I debate, like, it's really frustrating when that happens, because there's lots of times there's a very like clear line of like questioning that you want to go down with the other person, that like they cannot justify this, but lots of times the moderator will end up like finding something that they think is just like more entertaining, and then they go in that direction instead. Like, oh, this Democrat just said the word woman. Can you define the word woman, Democrat? Like that they'll, just totally obfuscate the panel. And so I'm hoping that, with my ability to actually engage in debates in that way, that I won't end up cucking the other person who does want to go in one direction or the other. And that I think that with my experience in both the right and the left, that I can steelman both sides and be able to get out of the other person whatever it is that they're looking for by doing it this way. And so we'll see how it goes, but hopefully I've been planning on doing it for a while. There's a lot of technical issues that I got to work out first. How does my audio sound a little fuzzy today? I
think it sounds fine. I don't
know. Okay. Yeah, I think I think Discord does a really good job at fixing it, but my audio just had a bunch of problems yesterday, and I put it on mono, but if I do it like this, does it change for you?
I don't have a great ear for these things. I think you sound fine either way. I mean, I know
that...
I
was going to say, lots of people just can't hear the problems, so yeah.
Yeah, I have... I don't know what it is myself. It feels like I turn on stream, and I stream, and the audio's fine for 3 or 4 streams in a row, and then I turn on stream without changing anything, and all of a sudden there's fucking problems and shit. It's how does this happen? I don't know. Well, why doesn't it just sound the same whenever I don't do anything? So I don't know. But just go back to school and get an audio engineering degree, and
sure,
you'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah, fair enough.
But all right, well, it was good talking, Tom.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Later.